So now we're live. Hi everyone. There's been lots of new people coming in to this hackathon. So just a short presentation of me. So my name is Ronnie Eriksson and I'm one of the co-founders and organizers of What the Quack, an online hackathon. So it's nice to see that so many people have taken the time to join also this keynote. This time our guest is Gyöngyi from Hanken, the Department of Humanitarian Logistics. And she is here to actually talk about COVID-19 effects on the society, which is really relevant to the projects and the problems that we're solving during this hackathon. So the first thing we actually could start off with was you, Gyöngyi, a bit of introduction of yourself, and then you could also introduce the Humanitarian Logistics Department at Hanken and what all things you are cooking up over there. Welcome and thank you for coming here to our keynote. Please.
Thank you for having me.
Of course.
And I'm pretty excited to see all the solutions that you guys are coming up with. So my name is Gyöngyi Kovacs. I work at Hanken at the supply chain management part of Hanken, basically. I'm a professor in humanitarian logistics, which is funny in the sense that, business schools are not usually expected to have such a thing, but we've been focusing on humanitarian logistics for a long time at Hanken. We started off in 2004-05 and established an institute in 2008, which is the Humanitarian Institute. And there we have a lot of activities related to all sorts of disasters. That can be anything. We work with natural disasters, we work with crisis and war zones, we work with delivering aid mostly to all sorts of things. And delivering aid is very much a matter of logistics. It is up to 80% logistical activities that you're really considering when you're delivering aid, whether that's to a pandemic or whether that's to a natural disaster. Cost-wise also, it varies. Somewhere between 60 and 80% of your costs are going to be logistics costs. You probably see that now in COVID-19 as well, when you're realizing that a lot of things that we are lacking suddenly are hiking up in price, then you haven't really thought through transporting them, then they are not available here and there. We are talking a lot more about inventory management and preparedness stock than we would have otherwise done. These are things we do a lot, and nobody usually notices unless there is really a problem in society. So that's what we deal with. The Humanitarian Institute has a lot of projects related. Currently, we've been teaching, for example, UNICEF warehouse and inventory management. Right now, we are the supply chain management training provider for UNHCR and work with refugees a lot. Then we also have just finished a project in Syria, Yemen, and Iraq about tracking and tracing deliveries to war zones. So you name it, it's quite different. What we've now started up, and this is probably why I'm here to talk to you, is a COVID-19 project, which is a European Union project. It's under the Horizon 2020 umbrella, if that says anything to you. It's pretty big. We do have quite a number of different organizations and institutions involved, mostly across Europe, but also around the world. And as in all of our projects, also here we work very tightly and closely together with humanitarian organizations. In this project, the main organizations we work with is, for example, Project HOPE. That's a medical logistics organization also delivering items to Wuhan, and they've been involved with COVID-19 from the very beginning. They're also one of the very few organizations that are actually licensed to deliver anything to China in these kinds of cases. China is rather restrictive when it comes to humanitarian organizations otherwise. Then we have the Italian Red Cross on board, and you can imagine that they are rather busy with a lot of things. And the Polish Center of International Aid. Now, they are quite interesting in the sense that they have something called emergency medical teams that are being sent out to emergencies, particularly in pandemics. So that's what they do. What I've been working with, apart from being a professor, I'm also a delegate of the Finnish Red Cross. So I sometimes am sent out to all sorts of disasters as well. And there, of course, there are lots of things that the Finnish Red Cross works with, from the Ebola crisis to cholera outbreaks to you name it. So medical aid is not new to us in general. maybe that much as an introduction. Is that enough, Ronnie?
Yeah, that's perfect. Really nice to learn more about you and hear what you have been doing at Hanken and otherwise. So, as we also already mentioned in the previous keynote with Peter Westerbacka, we have been working on this ambitious Africa project and building these incubators down there with Envisage. And I also understood that you have been working with different pandemics and epidemics around the world, such as the Ebola down in Africa and also over here. So could you elaborate a little bit on that and what kind of solutions and things you actually worked with when working with those pandemics and epidemics in the time?
So I'm a logistician, as you may have heard. So obviously I'm not a healthcare provider, and I'm not going to be going in as a nurse to anything or as a doctor. I mean, I have a doctorate, but that's in supply chain management. So even though my kids take me as a doctor when I talk to them, don't take medical advice from me. But what you do as a logistician, you do try to source the items that you need, anything from the medical, like the drugs themselves, to especially PPEs, the personal protective equipment. That's very high on the agenda. And the Ebola crisis was one of those where we realized the first time, in fact, that there is a PPE shortage around the world. Like really globally, we couldn't provide enough PPEs for the Ebola crisis in Sierra Leone and Liberia. The last one in DRC was a little bit easier with that. Then we work a lot with cold chains, because when you're delivering drugs, some of them need temperature control. Vaccines usually, if you have live ingredients in a vaccine, are not allowed to freeze, because that means you killed off the vaccine. They are also not allowed to be exposed to heat. But then you have very funny vaccines, like the Ebola vaccine, that needs minus 60 degrees Celsius, so that's quite on the other opposite of things. And try to deliver that into the bush in DRC, in Congo. That's a bit of a challenge. So these are the kinds of things we work with.
Perfect. Okay, now that we're actually in this hackathon, we're actually 24 hours has 10 minutes then passed, so we're half through the hackathon itself. So what would you and the niche that you're actually working in want to see that are delivered and built in this kind of hackathons? Where do you see that the value is, and how do you see that people could actually come to you and ask for help and find different solutions through the things that you provide for the moment?
So I think the hackathon has a lot of value just by being there. I mean, let's start there, because I think right now, if you look at the news, a lot of it focuses on apocalyptic this and that, and how we all are going to die, or how we are out of this and that, and especially how we are impacted on. So especially supply chain disruptions are going to impact on us overall in every aspect of our lives, especially in the healthcare system. So I think the first big issue of the hackathon is to make that to a positive change, and to think about, okay, what can people contribute? And I'm sure that all of us can. From anything to go shopping to your neighbor to actually come up with bigger solutions. And there are solutions right now needed in a lot of areas. When it comes to pandemics, and you can see it in Finland, you can see it everywhere else, people are also going to be out of jobs. So, I mean, even just tackling that unemployment is a societal issue par excellence. Day laborers in particular are out of job. So any business solution that also employs people is a good one. Then when it comes to really our area of medical logistics and humanitarian logistics, there are a couple of things I might just want to say as almost warning words. Usually what we get is a lot of apps of how to provide healthcare advice, or how to track people and things like that. They can be useful in some societies, but in a lot of societies, if you don't have mobile phone coverage, or if you don't have access to, say, clean water to wash your hands, they are very limited in applicability. So maybe if you just bear that in mind. Another thing to bear in mind is typically if you're trying to come up with a new item, or a new, say, whether that's a new type of face mask, or whether that's a new type of whichever protective gear, which is not much discussed, keep in mind that there are standards to what extent they need to be hygienic, and it's not, and those standards are fairly limited in what you can use as materials, and they will be limiting in how you're putting it together. So those standards are there for a reason. Not everything in every material works for you. So try to look at the requirements of these kinds of items before you come up with a new solution on how to produce them. What else? Typically, if you're delivering drugs, you will need a number of different items together. So say if you're delivering a vaccine, you will need syringes, you will need gloves, you will often need possibility and access to water. So what you will find in the humanitarian space is that we often deliver not just a drug, but a kit around the drug. So a malaria kit is more than just a malaria pills. A kit for any kind of vaccine will have the syringes and the gloves and the way how to also medically and safely get rid of syringes. So think of those kinds of items going together, that they all have to be provided in order to be able to actually effectively do something.
Okay, perfect. That's really interesting. How about we have some ideas that are scratching the surface of what you are actually doing. So what would you say, what kind of solutions that are formulated in this hackathon or hackathons overall would benefit for the work that you are actually doing? And what kind of help could you actually provide to these different startups and ideas that are formulated during this hackathon?
Well, if I start with the latter, I mean, things that we can easily connect you with is, for example, the standard requirements of items and then standard product catalogs, so that you can have an idea of like, okay, what would meet the standard when you're delivering something new or inventing a new way of making something. Typically, these are not just standards in the sense of how thick should a blanket be, say, but what they tell you is the specifications of how warm it should be and how under which kinds of temperatures you should be able to use it. So you can, and there are lots of options of what you can still play with and come up with new solutions, but still you need to meet the need there. So that's maybe one thing that we can provide. Also these kinds of kitting ideas and what goes together. I think issues that I'm really looking for in this hackathon, and this comes back from the global supply chain perspective. Now there's a lot of gaming on who has access to what around the globe. I don't know if you read the news just now of how the US has redirected items that Germany as a state has bought, so that they go to the US instead of to Germany, and that is kind of leading to a new trade war almost. So instead of that, there is no, and there's a good point to it, quite a strong reorientation to local production. So any kind of ideas you can come up with where local production facilities that might not know anyway be able to produce what they usually produce could be used to produce something that is critical and vital for pandemic response, that would be super useful.
Perfect. Now, I would like to encourage everyone in this live stream and keynote speak to actually post some questions. So Gyöngyi is actually able to answer. She is really well knowledgeable in this area. So if you have any specific questions regarding this, please post those in the chat so we can come back to them as soon as possible. But for the moment, I would like to know, you have started this new program at Hanken in the beginning of April. Could you elaborate a bit what you're actually doing and what the goals are that you are actually trying to come to for the moment?
There are lots of different goals, of course. I mean, the main issue is to make pandemic response more effective. That's, in a nutshell, that would be the goal. The project we have is called Heroes. It brings together 4 main areas of research and, of course, application. If I just quickly run through them, the first area of research has to do with crisis governance. particularly looking at who is making what decision when it comes to a pandemic, how particular policies are implemented around the world. To give you an example, social distancing is a policy, but it's implemented very differently in Finland than even in Sweden, than say in Italy. So those kinds of policies, how they are implemented. Then also crisis governance is a question of like at which time in a pandemic outbreak is a particular decision more effective. So we are tracking it in time as well in relation to the outbreak and trying to determine which policy should be taken when. Then another part of the project has to do with epidemiological modeling. We are particularly looking at the behavior of local people and how their behavior and differences in behavior in different locations make a difference in how the disease actually spreads. We also look at how the behavior of healthcare staff makes a difference. So not just you and me, but anybody really working with the pandemic as well. Then a third major thing has to do with social media information, especially misinformation and countering misinformation. That, in fact, is a huge area where also the hackathon, I'm sure, could be very beneficial if you find good ways of how to spot it if somebody is spreading fake news or outdated news. This is actually one of the biggest problems right now, not just fake, but outdated news, and try to counteract it. And then the last part is what I'm really doing, and that's the medical supply chain, making sure that items get manufactured, the capacities would be up, that they get directed and be brought to pandemic outbreak areas. It is a challenge also because if you have export bans and travel bans, it impacts tremendously on transportation capacity. So we are a bit struggling with that right now, but that's the area that we are working with.
Okay, it's really interesting with the social media and the fake news part. We had this one company on Hanken Business Lab actually solving this called Media Gavel, but when they actually were building it up, there was not that big of a need to spot this fake news. But I can understand that the situation has actually changed a lot now, especially due to this COVID-19 pandemic. But a bit about the social distancing that you named. So we have many companies that are actually building some kind of community platforms, trying to break the barriers between the social distancing. So what is your thoughts about the social distancing and those communities? What would be actually the best possible solutions there? And what would be actually bring most value when doing something with social distancing?
It's a difficult one. Let me explain why it is a difficult one. It's you will have very different behaviors in different local populations and different needs in social distancing because of that. You also have very different population profiles. So there, with every disease, and this depends a lot on the disease, you will have a profile of whom the disease impacts on the most, so like who is the most likely to die, who's the most likely to get very sick, and so forth. With COVID-19, the most likely to die are elderly people and people who have already had a previous underlying medical condition. Now, with the underlying medical condition, that's the most difficult because you cannot spot it. You don't know which 5-year-old has an underlying medical condition and which 40-year-old has one. The elderly people part of it is probably a little bit easier in that sense to spot and also to regulate. When it comes to then any solutions to it, you could have solutions that are targeting particularly those people who know that they have underlying medical conditions, that they can themselves spot if somebody is coming too close. That could be definitely of value to those people. What is much more difficult to do is to try to track people's movements generally, because then we are getting into huge privacy concerns. So if you're directing your efforts, direct your efforts towards helping those who know that they will need it. Exactly. They will also be much more likely to actually then use your products and services.
Exactly. Perfect. Now there came in our first question. So take your time and read it and answer it the best you can.
Okay, I'll read out the question, might give me some time to think. Should factories producing other products transform now to make medical equipment in Finland? If yes, to what extent is it needed in terms of the manufacturing capacity globally? Very brief answer to the first one, I would say yes. If you have a chance to do so, please do so. And there are very good examples of that, also in Finland, where, for example, breweries that work with very similar products and byproducts are now manufacturing hand sanitizers. So, and they are very welcome endeavors. I know in Norway also very early on in the pandemic, the Norwegian government has called on all industry to consider manufacturing things that are critical and become suppliers, and that has helped them quite a lot. To what extent is it needed in manufacturing capacity globally? To a tremendous extent. Depending, of course, a little bit on the good. When it comes to face masks, now more and more governments tend to suddenly implement a policy to make them mandatory. It's even discussed in the US. It's certainly discussed in my home country, Austria, where suddenly supermarket employees have to wear face masks, which has not been the case, and it wasn't even the recommendation of the World Health Organization earlier. So there will be huge capacity concerns. There are other ones from ventilation here to PPEs. The problem is with PPEs and gloves and masks, like surgical masks, is that they're usually like made for a long-term use. So we are running out of them just by using them. So we definitely will need to increase capacities. Okay, I see a next question. Shall I run to that? COVID-19 and underlying causes is a part of the Horizon project. Nature's destruction is probably the reason. Wildlife trade and how then stop it. If I have any advice. So no, it's not part of our project. Mind you, there are 17 sister projects to our projects. There are 18 in total that the EU has funded. It could very well be that one of the other ones is tackling exactly this question. We are not. But having said so, I completely agree with you that wildlife trade in any case should be ended and should have ended a long time ago. How to end and stop it? Sometimes this can be actually, sadly, a positive outcome of a situation like this, that people are finally understanding that this needs to stop. Other than that, I think the only things that I've seen, especially when it came to wildlife trade with rhino horn and elephant horn, was to, whenever you found it, destroy it and be very, very strict with exporting those kinds of things. But it's super difficult to spot. It's from a supply chain management perspective, we always find it flabbergasting how this is even possible, considering how many kind of technologies we even have to spot anything that breathes in a container. And yet you have a lot of wildlife trade. So I know that the EU is working on other projects to try to mitigate these kinds of things, but I'm not sure how far those are.
Perfect. We have time for one more question.
Okay, how is Corona affecting the shipment of goods? Most of the countries are still keeping their borders open for goods, but the capacity is lowering due to, or the example, workers becoming sick. Yeah, the shipment of goods have been impacted already in the moment when, for example, in Finland, when Finnair announced that they're not flying to China, we had a huge shortage of items, both going to China and coming from China, because a lot of the cargo that goes in airplanes, which might be almost underestimated, is not necessarily going in cargo planes, but it's going in the belly cargo of normal passenger planes. So that has been impacted instantly, with all the airplanes being grounded and the industry suffering quite a lot. Now, when you say most of countries are still keeping their borders open for goods, that's not completely correct. Yes, many countries, at least in the EU, have started to do that, which I think is good. Suddenly, however, you have anything from kilometers long of trucks standing at borders to up to 1 or 2 days of just going through a border itself. So we've slowed it down fantastically. Also, there are export bans of especially critical items very often, which has become to a ridiculous situation that some countries don't let you export item X and the other one's item Y, and they depend on one another, but they don't sell to one another. And I would have zillions of cases like that. It's not particularly great. Is the capacity lowering due to people becoming sick? Yes. We know that healthcare workers have been sick like anywhere between 20% in Italy to now the latest figures in Poland. I've seen the 17% of healthcare workers getting sick by just doing their job. Similarly, logisticians do. So couriers, if you actually think that now you're buying from Foodora or Volt, you're doing people a favor. No, 50% of couriers get sick. It's huge numbers, and they are not protected because they are never given protective gear.
Perfect. We're actually running out of time now, so there was one more question, but we can continue on that after this, and I can post that answer then on Slack to everyone. So for now, I want to thank you, Gyöngyi, for so much for coming here today and giving us some full information what is actually going on from a whole different perspective that we have covered this far. So thank you for taking your time and helping us understand how the humanitarian logistics are working during this pandemic.
Thank you very much. If you have any questions, do reach out. I mean, we do work in this area, and we are very much welcoming every endeavor, and definitely talk to us. We might be able to help you as well.
Perfect. We will post an email to you guys, maybe a phone number, what else works you best, to Slack, so you will find the contact information from there. Now, Gyöngyi, please stay on the line with me, so we'll check that one question, find the answer to it, and then we take those contact information. Thank you to all the participants. Happy hacking for the rest of the day. We have still 24 hours left. Thank you. Bye-bye.